Hi everyone, my name is Kent C. Dodds, and I'm super thrilled to be joined by my good friend Rachel Neighbors. Say hi, Rachel.
Hey, good to see you all. I mean, well, not literally, but yes,
Yeah,
figuratively.
yeah, good to be seen by all, I guess. Well, Rachel, you and I always try to think where we met and how far we go back. I seem to remember getting to know you online. I think through Sarah Drasner is how I was introduced to you online. You did like a collab or something with her at some point years and years ago or
Oh my
something.
God.
I just remember getting connected to you through Twitter because of the cool things that you were building at the time back then. And yeah, and then just following you. And I think we met first at probably a React conference, maybe React Conf, or I'm not sure when.
Probably in Amsterdam.
Yeah, maybe that was the first time. But anyway, it's
Nice.
been a pleasure to know you online, and I'd love for the people watching to get to know you a little bit. So could you just tell us about yourself a bit?
Oh, wow, that's a lot. I grew up on a farm in the mountains in Virginia, made comics for teenage girls, had an award-winning career as a cartoonist. I'd always wanted to build video games though, and eventually there was a big recession, and I got into web development, not the same as video games. Then I got into web animation, still not the same as video games. Spoke around the world about it, made some cool things with Firefox, and eventually found myself here on the React team where I document React and React Native for learners like yours.
Well, that's wonderful. And React Native docs you have finished, as much as you can ever finish something, right?
Always a work in progress.
Yeah, yeah. But tell me about that experience of just doing a total overhaul of the React Native docs. What was that like? What was it like? The process of preparing and then actually doing the overhaul, and what have the results been so far?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, it's Cinderella story. You're like, wow, I get to join the React team. All I have to do is teach everyone React Native, which I don't know. Oh. When I arrived on the scene, React Native's documentation was sort of like this old haunted mansion, full of talking animals who were really quite friendly when you got past the kind of spookiness and, like what's in the West Wing side of things. React has a huge community of very helpful people. It also had completely organic homegrown documentation that was hand updated. And as you can imagine, with the documents not being a part of the release process, some of those reference materials were a little out of date, which gave us a bad reputation. One of the first things I did was set about cleaning house. That is to say, I went through and I installed metrics, like little thumbs up and thumbs down things, so we could start actually measuring people's satisfaction with the pages. I interviewed learners to be like, so what's your background? Where do you struggle? How do you use them? And launched surveys that helped me quantify some of the questions that those answers brought up. We ran our second survey, second annual survey just a few months ago. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the positive numbers that we've seen because of putting these measurements in place early. But after that, to update all the things, because there's this huge, amazing React Native community, so full of people who want to contribute. I ran this huge documentation update drive at the beginning of the year, and people came out of the woodwork to go through the source code, update the API references, ended up partnering with some amazing, dedicated community members who are now kind of like deputy editors who ensure that the docs stay up to date. We are actually internally on the React Native team looking for ways to make those API references automatically update with every release so that they never fall out of sync. Because if you rely on humans, then it gets tricky. But the perfect docs are like a balance of individual handcrafted documentation where someone is like, but what is the best way to explain this to an iOS developer? Along with hardcore, every time there's a change to this API, the docs are updated. We are blocking on this. So it's a little bit of machine and a little bit of human and a lot of love, and you come up with a really great resource. I started launching like all of these efforts started to reveal things like we were kind of taking it for granted that people had React experience when they'd be learning React Native. Actually, like 33% of the people who were filling out the survey, React Native was like their first stab at programming ever. So opening up with, you've heard of React, right? What if you could do React on Android and iOS? Mm, that you can't really expect that people understand React. And we also found out a lot of people were coming in straight from iOS or Android development, and we needed to be using language that directly addressed their environments. You know, it's not native platforms, it's Android and iOS. And so this changed a lot of our vocabulary. We created these special flyouts that explain different terms to people who might not be familiar with them. Like Android developers are still growing accustomed to design systems. So, you know, you might be like, oh, like Material UI library. Just trying to translate some of these concepts into stories that resonate with so many different audiences from so many backgrounds. And that meant introducing, like building new documents that break down, you know, what does it mean when we talk about a view? A view is like an atomic component of an interface in native development. Sort of like how you might think of an element in web development. A refresh on React that just introduced people to how to build a very tiny React Native state component, stateful component from the bat, just because people might be coming in without React knowledge or rusty React knowledge. We just wanted to get their feet wet. And those docs have really scored well with the metrics. We have more illustrations because we have a lot of visual learners. People have been asking for visual examples, interactive examples, and that was part of the documentation drive, was to make all our examples interactive so people could see on the screen what they'd be getting and tweak and fiddle around with things. And it just made a huge difference. Our happiness rating across the board went up 70% since we launched the new docs in January. So I'm very pleased with that. But there's still more we could do. We could have a brand new fancy tutorial, definitely like automating the docs. There are so many ways we can continue to move the needle. But I do think that going out, interviewing learners, having that conversation with the community, and measuring where we're getting it right and where we're getting it wrong is crucial to continuing that journey.
Oh, that's great. Very intentional process. Where did you learn to do that? Like how did you know a good approach that would lead to improved metrics?
Well, I think part of that comes from running my own courses and workshops, much like you can. But I had a background in UX design because I have a very long and wandering career path. It's like first she was a designer, then she was a UX designer, then she was a front end developer, and now she's doing document. Like what? But these skills really pay off. The illustration means that I can see where something might make more sense visually. The UX design experience means that rather than just going on my gut or, you know, taking a to-do list at face value when I join a team, I might question it and challenge it and go out and confirm or reject some of these hypotheses. I take a very scientific method approach to pretty much everything I do. And when you're making things for people, the best way to test them is on people. And so I think all of those weird work histories come together to create this approach that I take.
I think that's just awesome. And I'm excited to see your approach applied to the React web documentation. That's where I spend most of my time, is on the website. And so, yeah, what is like, what are you looking forward to for React for web, the documentation there? And what are some of the things that you learned from updating the React Native docs that you're able to apply to the update of the React web docs?
First off, of course, always talk to the audience. I mean, the React Native team was really active on GitHub and working with their engineering contacts around the React Native community. But they were less connected to, for instance, people who are training their reports how to use React Native. With React, the ecosystem is a little different. We have more people doing a larger scale trainings, much like yourself, and you have more people coming in out of boot camps, self-taught, etc. still, all the same, we didn't want to make any assumptions because we listen in on the conversation on Twitter, we talk to people at conferences, yes, but at the same time, that's just one subsection of people. Like people on Twitter is not a very common place to have conversations in Denmark, for instance. The conversations in the Danish tech community tend to happen on Facebook and LinkedIn. So that's just one example. There are so many. You really have to meet people in the field. So I will put a form out there and be like, "Hi, could I interview you about how you learn React?" And people around the world will fill it out. And I select people from many different backgrounds and countries. English is first and second language, and then interview them about, oh, so did you know that we have it in a different language? You didn't. Huh, maybe it's not that visible that React has so many translations. Maybe that needs to be more front and center on the main page. And getting these questions helps me build better surveys that ask more pointed, directed questions. For instance, is English your first language? Do you know if React comes in your is translated into your language? Would you read those docs? And now you've got something that you can measure year over year to make sure that you're reaching everybody you possibly can. And you can improve those metrics. But it all starts with interviewing people. And that's definitely something I'm bringing from my React Native experiences. I think also the success of the illustrations and the visuals that we added with React Native docs are going to have a pretty strong influence on the new React documentation. Right now, they're very, well, they read like essays, and that is awesome. If you can pay attention for that long. I can't. I don't read science fiction novels. I read graphic novels.
Same.
And I play video games. Yeah, right? You're like, engage me. I don't want to read text. Imagination.
Yeah, that's right. For real. Like I won't read a blog post or anything like that if it takes longer than a couple minutes.
Right. And I think we're not alone in this. There are plenty of whip smart people who could go very far, very fast if the documentation slowed down and worked just a little harder to explain some of these things the way you might on like a really beautifully designed slide for a conference. I know that like whenever you have bullet points on your screen when you're giving a talk, you can probably turn those into visual slides rather than bullet points. And the same goes for documentation. There are places where I just look at the paragraph and it's like, is this the best way to describe what is happening? Or would a flow chart look better? Maybe I need a visual metaphor of a hen passing her genes on to her chicks to explain how a component can pass its props down to its child components. So that's the sort of entertaining metaphor and storytelling that you can do with images that I look forward to doing with the React docs.
Oh, that's great. I look forward to seeing the hen and the chicks and those kinds
We'll
of
see
things.
if it makes it through the editing floor.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fun. I totally agree because I was actually just in preparation for our conversation. I was looking through the React docs because lots of it I haven't looked through this for years, and so the documentation is actually very good, and the
Yeah.
approach that they take to explaining things, it's very similar to my own approach to explaining some things. And so I think that mostly despite that, I still get a lot of questions that are very obviously answered in the docs, but people are still asking me, and that's telling me that like they're not reading the docs or maybe they're not understanding them. And so
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to getting some sort of improvement there so that it's more obvious, or at least it sticks better for them or something.
And to that end, I want to thank you. You are one of the people that I interviewed working on these docs. I also interviewed people who teach React to understand how they're using the documentation. How are we teaching teachers? And I really appreciated your taking the time to do that. My hopes, I think, are that with the help and collaboration of folks like you, we can find out where these things are that people are asking about over and over again so that we can definitively address them and hopefully free people's cycles up to ask bigger questions about things like concurrent mode. Where do we use that? What's the future of React? How is this going to impact my design system, etc.?
Yeah, precisely. I think that it's nice when so many people are asking the same question. If we could just put the answers in one place, and then those question askers can think of new questions, and the people who are answering, who used to be answering those same questions, can actually answer newer and more interesting questions, which is, I think, is great. So as part of the rewrite of the docs, another thing that or a big part of that effort will be a transition from classes, or yeah, from classes as the main part to hooks. Right now, hooks is kind of off on its own on the side, but like if you, any survey that I take of the community, most people are transitioning to or are completely using hooks. So
Right.
yeah, it'd be nice if the docs reflected that. So can you tell us a little bit about that transition?
Well, we are rewriting everything from the ground up to be hooks based, but the existing docs will still be archived. Like you can still go read everything about how classes and the life cycle work, etc. And the hooks docs will live on as sort of transitional upgrade path documentation. So don't worry if you're heavily relying on the docs as they are now. They're not going to just evaporate overnight. We're gonna hook you up, and but it does require a bit of a rewrite from the ground up. Right now, people are really confused. They take a training course, they learn about hooks, but when they come to the site, where's the hooks documentation? What's all this classes stuff? Oh my gosh, it's very hard on trainers. You just want to give people a link. You just want to say, if you want to learn more about UseVet, go here. And it's kind of buried because much like React Native's documentation, the hooks docs grew organically off the existing React docs as a little subset. Like the React team initially was very, will people adopt hooks? Will they like? Will they trust us? Will this become a thing? And it became a thing. It took off in a huge way. Like if you're building from scratch, you're building with hooks now. And the docs just, the information architecture did not anticipate that. So we got to go fix it.
Yeah, so I guess there's not too much more to say. It's going to happen and it's going to be great. so, um, so, so that's great. So you mentioned that you have a bunch of people who've come out of the woodwork for React Native on the React Native docs, and that's been really helpful. What are the kinds of things? I guess I kind of want to transition the conversation over to, like, for the people listening, what are the kinds of things that they can do? Like how can they help in documentation in general? But yeah, so what are the kinds of things that people helped with or that were really helpful when you were rewriting the React Native docs?
I can speak to both React and React Native on this. For React, where would we be without our wonderful translation community? It is an amazing thing. We have these people contributing their time, stewarding their local communities, and making sure that anybody anywhere can learn React. And it's not just React that has translation communities. If you're like, how do I get my start in open source? And maybe the community is like, oh, we don't need any more translators. Many different libraries need help with translations. So look at your tool chest, look at what you're using. Is there a translation in your language that uses for that particular library? Go ask the maintainers. I think this is something that is easy to overlook, but so many crucial pieces of tech come out of the English speaking world. And it's important that they be made available to everyone, no matter where they are. Everybody should have access to the same tools. So that's one thing that you can do. And I'm assuming, because you're listening to this podcast, you probably speak English. So if you also speak another language, that is a magical combination. Other things that you could do, for instance, with React Native's documentation, we have constantly been accepting, well, both docs really, typos, proofreads, etc. Like if you catch that the grammar is wrong, submit a PR for that, a pull request on GitHub. There's usually an edit link on every page. That's not just in React, but also like any open source library where you can get a GitHub pull request in and have that merged and get your green square for the day. If you're thinking, well, I'm not much on editing, I'm more interested in design, I don't feel like I could contribute directly to any kind of a library, I'm not an engineer. Believe it or not, we need designers too. React Native's documentation has benefited from many small design tweaks. Like I introduced the little thumbs up and thumbs down interface, but then a designer came by and made it look even better. Whenever somebody comes by and is like, I really want to help make this look even more professional and start submitting like mock-ups, oh, it's so exciting. One of our biggest challenges with the React docs is going to be the design, making something that's first class and super approachable, but at the same time professional. And we just adore it when community partners want to get together and make something that amazing. If you're a niche expert at something, for instance, with React Native, we had people who are niche experts at security and testing come in and write guest posts or entire sections in our guides, just explaining these concepts and doing getting started demos, etc. That is a meaningful way that you can contribute your niche knowledge into community's documentation as well. And lastly, if you are an artist and you love creating illustrations to explain how things work, you still have something you can contribute to documentation, because for people with visual learning styles, that is such an incredibly valuable thing to add to their journey. I encourage you to stick your neck out and see how you can contribute whatever your talent is.
I think that's wonderful, and I appreciate you mentioning like it doesn't have to be React or even like a big project. It can be smaller projects and lots. I was thinking about with the translations, lots of some smaller projects just have a README. They don't have a big website or anything,
So
and
true.
as a like you could go and build a website. That'd be cool. But if you want to come in and translate what they have already, here's a suggestion. As an open source author myself for many with many projects, I think it would be totally cool to have a folder at the root level of the repo that's translations, and then a README dot, whatever, like es for Spanish .md. And then you just put the, like, so it doesn't have to be this big complicated system.
That's
Just
right.
translate it there and then put a link in the README. Here's the Espanol translation. Um, so
That's a
yeah,
great point. And if you see a growing community, like something you use all the time and all they've got is a README, and you're like, man, they need something better than a README. There is this lovely piece of Facebook open source called Docusaurus, which is what React Native runs on, their documentation. React documentation runs on some homegrown Gatsby. But Docusaurus is like this lovely out of the box package. You could just like run and it builds a documentation website for you. And it's got like some built-in initializations for translations, etc., that you can just flick on. So if you need to go like, oh, how am I going to take it from READMEs to a site? I don't have enough time. There are options for that as well. And that could be an incredibly meaningful contribution to your favorite project.
absolutely. Testing library uses Docusaurus, and it's
Oh, wow.
really nice to have that. So thank you, Facebook open source.
Thank
So yeah, another thing that occurred to me that I suffer from as an open source maintainer from documentation is sometimes and I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well. Sometimes you get these people who are contributing documentation and they've done just a wonderful job, but there's a lot of proof reading and editing that needs to happen, lots of feedback and back and forth on PRs, and it takes a lot of time. So I don't always
Yes.
have that time. So another great contribution opportunity is, for at least from my perspective, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. But another great opportunity is to watch the repo for pull requests and provide feedback on other people's pull requests.
Absolutely. There are some things like voice and tone that you'll always need, like the people who are responsible for the repo to sign off on. But if you can help grammar check, ask people to expand, even contributing a style guide and then just checking the pull requests to ensure that they are conforming to the style guide, such a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, that's great. Is there anything else that that we missed about the contributing side to documentation?
Oh my gosh. I think we have covered everything about contributions. I think that docs are a great place to get started with contributing to open source. Additionally, it can get you, um, well, I hate to be so cutthroat about it, can get you face time with core contributors because obviously you need tech reviewers, and that can be a wonderful way to sort of get schooled directly from the people who have built the thing that you are writing about. So if you want to become a master quickly, writing the docs is a great way to do that.
That's actually a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of my experience early on was derived from those types of interactions. So that's very cool.
Oh, I didn't know that about you, Ken.
Yeah, yeah. Open source taught me a ton, and it still teaches me a lot. A lot. Recently, it's taught me a lot more about proper interactions and or friendly interactions, human interactions with other humans. So open source is pretty cool that way.
I kind of want to know more about that, but isn't it me being interviewed by you, or
Yeah.
do I get to interview you?
Yeah, maybe we could do that sometime. It's
That'd be
good.
fun.
So another thing that we talked about before, actually recording here, is a book that I really love and that you also seem to love called Make It Stick. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about how Make It Stick has impacted the way that you write documentation?
Well, I'm a big fan of this book, and if your learners are interested in spending, I think it's an 8-hour audiobook, interested in having a listen, might change how they approach learning new things. I'm a lifelong learner, never gonna stop learning, not interested in stopping anytime soon. And the techniques in this book is sort of like, man, why didn't somebody tell me this?
For
Uh,
real. I could have used this in college and yet, actually pass my class as well.
Well, honestly, I joined the team because I was trying to learn React, but without being able to contribute constantly to React, because, like I was working with the W3C, writing API documentation, etc. Like, how does the Web Animations API work? Let us sit in a room and talk about that for a long time. And that's lovely, but that's not production work. And I was learning from books, and then I forget what I'd read in the book, and I'd be like, well, oh, maybe I'm just a dummy and I can't figure it out. But I knew that couldn't be true because, like, come on, everybody can learn React and programming. I've met people who, 2 years out of boot camp, they're like senior software engineers. I'm like, if they can do that, like, Rachel, what's your excuse? And so, for me, I found that the thing that was getting me was that I was doing repetition. I read it and I understand it, but without applying it, then it wouldn't come back. The thing that Make It Stick really presses that's been so useful is that it's not enough to just show people and make them do some exercises and move on. It's that you have to bring them back to doing that work time and time again, which is why it's so great to learn on the job. And I think that's important for employers to remember when they're hiring people. You're not just like hiring someone who can do, you're hiring someone who can learn. What you want to see is that they can recall information, perform a task with that recalled information, and that they will perform it even faster after going like a period of time without using that information and recalling it. I actually use this technique to get better at my Zerg rushes playing StarCraft 2.
Nice.
It's so you could sit here and play like StarCraft 2 for 3 hours straight, right? Just match after match after match after match. But the problem is that your brain isn't really storing that information. It's putting it into short-term memory and then it flushes. And so when you walk away, you've done a lot of repetitive motions, but you're only going to be able to store so much information for all the hours that you spent on that. Kind of like when you cram, your immediate recall for the test the next day is probably really high, but your long-term recall isn't because your mind is flushing that information out. What you want to do is, for me, I'll do like three one versus one games, and then I will, cool it, go away, maybe watch some YouTube videos of people fighting with commentary on that evening, or vary it with like reading some of the StarCraftpedia entries about the different units. And then the next morning, I do another three battles again. And by touching on the information in different ways, like here I'm watching other people, here I'm playing with my friends, here I'm reading articles about it, and then limiting my practicing to like, you don't have to go all out. You don't have to write components for like a whole week and expect that you're going to be a master of React the very next week. It's actually better if you just like make a few components in the morning, watch a Kent C. Dodds tutorial, read some documentation, go through some code and troubleshoot it with your friends. And just doing it different ways a little bit over time can really help make it stick. And we've been looking at ways to incorporate that into the documentation. Some like, I'm actually going to pause here and see if you have a comment to make, because I know you're a big fan of this book and I want to hear how you've been using the teaching techniques.
Yeah. Let's make sure we don't forget to come back and ask you how you're going to apply this to the docs. So yeah, I read Make It Stick maybe 4 years ago, and it totally changed the way that I do workshops and teach just in general. And retrieval over repetition is a great practice, and it's hard for me to do that in a workshop setting that's like a 4 to 6 or 7 hour workshop, because I mean I can do like the first part of the day we teach this concept, and then at the end of the day we teach that concept again. Like it's just, I actually emailed the authors of Make It Stick and asked them like, how do you apply this sort of thing? They gave me a couple of interesting ideas. They were very nice, very helpful. So yeah, a couple of the things from Make It Stick that I applied to my workshops, as well as Epic React, that people who have been through any of it will recognize, is the concept of generation. So I don't teach the concept. I introduce the problem, and then I let them solve it before I teach it. This has been very effective. It's a little painful. Some people don't like it very much, but I do provide them all of the resources that they need to go read up on things, links to docs. I have little helpful emoji friends that they follow along through the code that say, okay, this is where you're going to do this. And here's a chunk of code that's not related to what you're trying to learn, so I'll just give this to you, different things like that. And then at the end, once they've watched, once their brain has been opened up to the problem and they've struggled to solve it, then they can watch my solution, and it makes way more sense than if I just shown it to them in the first place. And then when we're all finished, I do the elaboration step where they have to write in their own words the stuff that they learned. And so they fill out this form that I've got for them for every single one of these exercises. And like, here's in my own words the stuff that I learned. And that's also been really insightful for me because I actually see those. And so it helps me to iterate on my exercises, but it helps solidify in their mind what they actually learned. So a huge part of Epic React and all my workshops that I've been working on for the last several years is, how do I ensure that it doesn't go in one ear and out the other? How do I make sure that they actually remember this stuff? And Make It Stick has like made a huge impact on the way that I accomplish that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, as documentation, we kind of expect people to use this more as a reference for materials, the sort of thing that you might link out to. But we also want to accommodate people who are like, no, I'm going to learn this by reading the docs, and also expand on certain programming concepts that maybe you might not get if you don't have a computer science degree. We introduce a lot of interesting concepts with React that are unfamiliar to people who might, just like me, come from a HTML and CSS and JavaScript background. And we have this brilliant opportunity to sort of unpack some of these things. Like, what is the rendering engine? How does that work? Like the difference between, async and, oh my gosh, oh there's async, and then there's it's like you call it one after another, and then you can call several things running at the same time because they're parallelized, and I've forgotten the actual technical term for it.
Sequential or
synchronous? Yeah. Synchronous. Thank you. That is the word. There's synchronous and right. Asynchronous code. Oh my God, I've had too much tea today.
You're good.
But it's good to unpack these kind of when people meet them in the field, or at least, linked places that expand and unpack those things for them. A lot of what we learned on React Native is it's good to unpack topics that might be new to some people, like even if that's just being able to expand the term and there's an example in line or a glossary that reminds people. For instance, for me, I have a glossary sheet on my computer that says that I look things up on, like memoization. Memoization is caching for functions. That every time I see it, I'm like, what? And now this helps me because it's been put into a metaphor that I understand. I've explained it in terms of something I already know. I've built on top of that pyramid. That said, we don't have people sitting down for a week with us or even a day. We don't know how long people are going to take. Ideally, we would love for you to be able to come to the React site and read through all of our content in 4 hours and get up and running. That would be like the dream, so that people could feel confident in React within 4 hours, right? That's a little hard to get to, but we have picked up on some things that seem to work better than others. For instance, people learn faster when they are in a challenging situation. When you kind of, throw people out the window, so to speak, they will remember to open their parachute because it's a challenging situation. Some things, for instance, the linter and React's dev tools, we don't really teach with them in the documentation as it currently stands. React's dev tools have a standalone interactive tutorial site, but we don't mention them, we don't introduce you to them, we don't show you how to troubleshoot React code when you're working with it. So we got this great idea that perhaps the great thing to do at the end of each section is to have people using an inline editor fix the broken component. Check
Whoa.
out what the linter says, check out, inspect it with the dev tools, fix the code. This has
That
been
is
my favorite
so
way to
good.
learn.
I love
Ah,
that. That's great.
and this is kind of how Dan teaches me. Dan's like, Rachel, triage these issues. And I'm like, Dan, no. And Dan's like, this is how you learn, Rachel. But it's good, isn't it? And it's so satisfying because usually when you're looking at the code, you're thinking, it can't be what I think it is. Am I crazy? Can't. No, I'm seeing things. But if it's an interactive editor, you can just, no one's looking. You can just test it out right there and
Hmm.
solve the problem.
Oh, I love that. I think that's great. And it seems like you're very cognizant of the different places that people are coming from, like having this glossary and things. And when we talked a few weeks ago about the React docs, one thing that you asked me is a good example of other documentation sites. And I found one that I thought would be interesting to talk about right now, just briefly. And
Okay,
it's
I'm not putting this into my browser at all right now.
yeah, it's Discord.js. Discord has an API, and there's a module for interacting with that API, mostly for bots, but like OAuth and stuff too. Um, and their documentation, they have like kind of two docs. They have the API docs that's just like reference, very computer generated stuff, but then they have a guide, and that guide is like, it is so clear that they understand their audience is not JavaScript developers. Like they do not, the people who are writing Discord bots are not used to writing JavaScript. They're just trying to get their bot to do the thing. And so with that, they're very good at explaining, so here's how you do this simple thing, and here's how we can improve this using some different JavaScript syntax and different JavaScript APIs, that if you were experienced with JavaScript, you wouldn't need them to tell you that, because like, oh, okay, so those things run in parallel, so I can just do promise.all and then async await that thing and whatever. But it's very clear that they don't, or that like they understand a lot of people coming in would have no idea that those APIs exist. So they're going to take the time to add some extra stuff to explain, like, you could improve this a little bit by changing it this way. So I'm very impressed by those docs. If anybody wants to go through, it's kind of fun to write a Discord bot. So there's that too. And
Right.
my KCD Discord community has a bot, and you're welcome to contribute to it if you want to.
Nice. I might have to check these out now and build something for the Women of React Discord.
Yeah. It's way easier than you expect. It was, at least it was easier than I expected. Yeah, just get your token, couple lines of code, and boom, you can start talking with the bot. It's cool.
It's really, how do I put this? It's challenging to write React docs for everyone because there are people learning React who don't have a background in JavaScript. Like we can't anticipate that somebody who's been working on a design system and building modules for it for their career will understand async await. Like they may never have to deal with networking. So that is one of our challenges is just not taking anything for granted and yet still diving deep because there will be people who are on the engineering side of things who want to dive deep and this is all old hat and they just want to get to like what is the paradigm here. So that I think is a challenge, but I think like you said, I think it's something that can be done if you are careful and empathetic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Rachel, this has just been such a pleasure. We have to wrap things up though. So is
Mm.
there anything else that we didn't talk about you really want to just mention here before we wrap things up?
You know, I always forget about this one. People are like, Rachel, don't you have something to promote? I wrote a book on UI animation. You can find at a book apart. If you're interested in building animation with your interactions, it's all about when and where to use motion design so that you can build apps that people love. And you should definitely check out the React Native and React JS documentation if you're interested in building for platforms like Android, iOS, even Windows and Mac. React Native is a great option and you should check it out.
That's great. Uh, the book you said, Book Apart, is that what it's called, or what's the book called?
A, a Book Apart is the publisher. If you go to abookapart.com and look up animation at work, you will find it.
Excellent. That's definitely something. Maybe I should make a book club or something for that.
That's a great idea. You can start with Make It Stick.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Actually, I'll mention this just here at the end. We also have I started this thing called KCD Learning Clubs, where you can, I facilitate finding people who want to learn the same thing. We put them together in their own group Discord DM, and they can learn things together. They have a schedule and everything. It's really cool. So if anybody wants to put together a learning club for, it's Web Animation at Work, is that what it's called?
Just Animation at Work.
Animation at Work. Yeah. So put a learning club for that, and that learn animations. That'd be good.
Awesome socks.
Okay. Thank
It's
you.
been awesome. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. We'll see everybody later. Bye.